Welcome everyone to the Lake Norman Chamber of Commerce Focus Friday. I'm Bill Russell, and we are very fortunate today to have Senator Jeff Jackson. Jeff Tarte is going to facilitate the program, but before we get started, I want to recognize that we have my board chair, Erica Erlenbach, on the line, as well as Cornelius Mayor Woody Washam and Joe Boss with the Charlotte Regional Business Alliance. I want to welcome Joe. Deepa, tell us what's going on with Novant Health Huntersville Medical Center. What are some of the activities going on there? You're our presenting sponsor, and we're fortunate to have you on board.
Good morning. I'm Deepa Johnston with Novant Health. Thank you guys so much for having me. Just a couple of quick updates. I was wanting to touch on a little bit. Our new pediatrics emergency department will be breaking ground in October. So we're very excited. We have some really great partners with that effort on board. And so that's going to be, such a big benefit to the Huntersville and the Lake Norman community. So we're very excited about that. On the hospital front and kind of what we're seeing across the Novant footprint is an uptake in actual hospitalizations and some other flurry of activities, not due to COVID. It's actually due to some other respiratory illnesses that we would have normally seen in the November, December, January timeframe. But I think the theory is now that more people are being unmasked, some of these illnesses are kind of coming back up, and we're starting to see across, honestly, the whole footprint. Each hospital has been very busy. We're also seeing many patients, for their long overdue maintenance visits. And so we're just, busy and chugging along, and really glad that we have kind of overcome this COVID hurdle. However, of course, the Delta variant is still out there, and we're very closely monitoring that. So, those are the updates for us at Novant Health.
Well, Deepa, we appreciate Novant Health support and your sponsorship as a presenting sponsor of this program, which is also sponsored by Business Today, Cornelius Today, and WSIC Radio. Before I turn it over to Jeff, I want to congratulate you. Yesterday, Jeff Tarte was recognized as our outstanding board member of the year for 2020 by outgoing chair Richard Pappas for the tremendous job that he did through 2020. It was a challenging year, but Jeff put on a lot of programs right up front when the PPP was hitting. He had folks on talking about how that was going to impact business. We had the county response, the state response. Had some fantastic speakers over the course of 2020, from our Speaker, Senate President, to Speaker of the House. We had the Attorney General, Secretary of Transportation. The list goes on and on. So Jeff, thank you for what you did for the Chamber of Commerce in 2020, but congratulations, outstanding board member of the year.
Big surprise, but I appreciate it.
Well, Jeff, you want to introduce our speaker and then begin facilitating the program? Because I know we got a lot of questions for the senator.
We do, and then we'll give the senator the floor for a little bit. Senator Jeff Jackson joins us this morning. Jeff, as background for everyone, I also consider him not only a colleague and a former colleague in the Senate, but also a personal friend. Senator Jackson is truly a class act, especially, even though our ideologies are on opposite sides of the fence. Somebody we actually ran bills together with, is full disclosure. Jeff is one bright individual. Emory undergrad, UNC Law, serves in the Senate now, handpicked by his party to replace Dan Cloudfilter, which were pretty big shoes at the time to fill. And somebody, again, I have high regard for, and somebody working with. But Jeff has proven to be, and has been, and continues to be, really the rising superstar in the Democratic Party, not only locally in Mecklenburg County, but across the state. Another thing that we want to tip our hat to Senator Jackson is he served our country. He served in Afghanistan. I think were you at Bagram, Jeff?
I spent time. Yeah, everybody in Afghanistan goes through Bagram, but I was in a remote desert outpost. We went back to Bagram when we wanted subway, because that's what Bagram had. They had a subway.
There you go. Yeah, that's pretty impressive. But anyway, we thank you for our service to our country and also to our state. So Jeff, with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to you. If you'll share kind of your updates and perspective on kind of the state of the state, what's cooking, and then we'll get into some questions and follow up after.
Sure. Hey, I appreciate that. And you gave me an allotted time in the email for the update. I don't think I'm going to take all of that. So I'm happy to use more time for questions and really appreciate the invitation. Just so you all know, in my time in the state Senate, I've been in the minority party for that entire time. And it can be a very partisan environment, as Jeff will tell you. When I think back, I've been there for 7 years. When I think back over that time, the shockingly bipartisan moments that I've seen were all at the hands of Jeff Tarte. The things that I saw that rocked me back on my heels because of how even-handed they were done by him. And I have 3 distinct memories that pop out in my head. And that caused some trouble for him sometimes because he was such a nice guy. Sometimes he took a little flack for that, which is interesting. That's the kind of environment it is where being nice can sometimes get you in trouble. I'm talking to you right now from a Comfort Inn in Pasquotank County. Just wanted to orient y'all to my Zoom background. I'm out here on the coast. Drove out here last night from Raleigh. Was in Northampton last night, and then have some town halls this weekend. So that's where I am. I went down and got the continental breakfast before we started. So I have some scrambled eggs here prepared in the style of ground beef, it appears. So I'll be having that as soon as we're done. But really getting a sense right now of how big the state is, because I'm going to every single county. We're doing 100 counties in 100 days. And I ran to the governor the other day. He said, "Jeff, it's a big darn state, ain't it?" I said, "Governor, I had no idea. I wish you had told me." But we are still in session. As Jeff said, a couple of big things that we're working on. Biggest right now is the budget. And the basic state of play there is that we have the largest surplus probably in the history of the state. I think it's about $6.5 billion. Some of that is recurring and some of that is non-recurring. And that's important to understand. It's not as if all of that money is coming back next year, but it's billions are recurring and billions are non-recurring. And that 6.5 estimate, by the way, is the consensus estimate. That's not a political number. There's like a Republican economist and a Democrat economist, and they came together and they gave us that number. So it's relatively solid. We didn't know it was going to be that big until about 5 or 6 weeks ago. It was dramatically higher than anyone expected. So when the governor proposed his budget, which was a couple of months ago, it was operating off of a much lower expectation. And so the situation is now such that you could, in theory, you could pass everything the governor wants in his proposed budget and everything the Republicans asked for in their proposed budget and still have money left over. It's an incredibly rare situation to be in. So that's the big hurdle right now. The Senate has passed the Senate. The House is looking at it. I imagine they'll pass their version in the next couple of weeks. I imagine the combined version, the conference report version, will pass a couple of weeks after that, and then it'll go to the governor for his signature or his veto. I think the heavy betting right now is on a veto. I think, if I'm just being candid with you, I think the Senate's budget is probably designed to elicit a veto, and that's just how this stage of the negotiation is played out. It's a high ball, low ball thing. It's very classic negotiation. Some of the big ticket items that are being kicked around for the budget negotiation include the rainy day fund and how much more to add to that. The governor had a proposal to add to that, I think to the tune of about $1 billion. I think the Senate Republican proposal was to add $3 or $3.5 billion, somewhere around there, to the rainy day. I think the rainy day stands at about $1 billion right now. Another big ticket item is state employees and whether or not to give them a raise and what amount. State retirees, whether or not to give them a cost of living adjustment. It's been a long time. I think the governor's budget had a 2% COLA for them. I don't think the Senate budget had a COLA for them. And then the perennial big ticket item here is teacher pay, teacher compensation. The basic division of labor in public education funding in North Carolina is the state pays the salaries and the counties build the buildings. It's the very simplistic overview that I give to my constituents, just to sort of orient them to the spheres of fiscal responsibility here. The Republican proposal was to raise teacher pay by 3%, and there might have also been a one-time bonus in there. And then the governor's proposal now for teacher pay is between about 3 and 10. Another perennial issue is Medicaid expansion. I'm sure some of you are familiar with this. I've been traveling the state, and one of the things that you see is some rural hospitals that are on the brink. The estimate is we got between 19 and 20 rural hospitals that are in some severe fiscal distress. And so Medicaid expansion comes up as a topic in the General Assembly. We haven't seen any particular movement on that, just to be objective in my reporting to you about that. One big surprise, one of the biggest surprises in my history in the state Senate occurred a few weeks ago when a medical marijuana bill passed out of the Judiciary Committee. Now, it's still got a really long road to go. I'm a little doubtful that it'll end up passing the full state legislature. But the story here is that the number 2 guy in the majority party, Senator Rabin in the Senate, had a personal experience with respect to cancer and his wife. And I know this because he told us about this in the judiciary hearing when he was presenting this bill. And I think he was motivated by his experience and his family's experience with this to put forth this medical marijuana bill. And it's been received with extreme skepticism by members of his party, as I could tell from the questions that were being asked by his party in the Judiciary Committee. And it's also been assigned to a total of 4 committees, which is as many as I've ever seen a bill assigned to. It shows the level of caution that they're taking with this. But we heard testimony from a lot of people, and the most powerful testimony came from Marines. A number of former Marines testified about PTSD and the effectiveness that they've at least personally had with this. Big debate about the eligibility criteria for being able to be prescribed medical marijuana. In the bill itself, it's being kept very narrow. Senator Rabin is actually touting this as the most restrictive medical marijuana bill in the country in order to gain support among members of his own party. And then, of course, you got folks on the left who are beating me up saying this bill's terrible because it's too restrictive and we'd rather have nothing than this bill. So you're seeing a really interesting left-right dichotomy play out on this particular issue. I honestly I would say I have no idea whether it's going to pass, and I think it's got a pretty good chance of passing the Senate just because Bill Rabin is spending all his political capital on this and putting a lot of political muscle behind it. But then it gets to the House, and what I've heard is it's being received with extreme skepticism there. So I really don't know whether this has a real chance. And there are very few bills that get to this stage where it's still highly in doubt as to whether or not they can pass. One of the things I like to tell my constituents back home to give them a sense of sort of what it's like being in the General Assembly is in 7 years, I think I've probably cast roughly 3,000 votes on all manner of bills. And every bill that's come to a vote is passed. The majority party is 3,000 for 3,000 on passing bills. So the fact that there's a bill of this magnitude and this profile that is in serious question as to whether or not it can pass is a level of unpredictability that you just never ever see, at least in public. That level of unpredictability is usually kept within the Republican caucus, so it's remarkable. Redistricting is going to come up later this year. That's going to be a massive issue. It's coming up later than it normally would because of the census. The pandemic delayed getting the census data back, so we haven't gotten the data that we need to draw the districts. I think we're going to get that in September, which means moving at light speed here, the districts could be drawn as soon as October. And then you have candidate filing in December, which means candidates don't even know what district they're going to end up living in, and they won't until about 60, maybe as little as 30 days before candidate filing. So all the people who want to run for office, all the prospective challengers out there are at an extreme disadvantage because they don't know if they're going to have, if they want to run against Bob, well, they don't know if they're going to live in Bob's district yet because the lines haven't been drawn. And by the time they're drawn, they're going to have to break the land speed record to gear up. And if they have to move, they're going to have to move very quickly and break leases and stuff. We had people in the last round of redistricting, which was the very last re-election, break leases to move into the districts they wanted to run in. This would be the regularly scheduled decennial redistricting. And of course, there will be litigation about it, 100%. There have been several proposals for a different form of redistricting, one that takes politicians out of it. Those proposals have fallen flat at this point. I don't anticipate those proposals getting any traction for this round of redistricting. There is a big bill with respect to Duke that is just passed at 1 minute after midnight, the night before last, I guess yesterday. And that deals with, and it's very controversial, but the big picture here is Duke has 7 coal power plants left in our state. And they understand that they have to accelerate the transition away from those plants. And so this is part of the conversation about how to do that. That's the big picture there. What that's going to look like, the remedial help that a lot of students are going to need. We haven't tackled that in earnest yet, but that's on the agenda as well. And then there's a big conversation about the vaccine and the Delta variant, and we're starting to see some numbers tick up that are starting to look a little concerning. So this sort of we're out of the woods feeling, we're tamping that down a little bit. I've gotten my shot. I feel really good about that. I hope all of you have, and I hope all of you encourage your friends and family to do that as well. That's the lay of the land as I see it right now. Jeff, I'm sure I left off about 10 things that this group would be interested in talking about. So I will trust you to guide me to anything that you'd like to touch upon.
All right, let's do
I'll
this.
return the microphone back to you, sir.
I appreciate it. And thanks for those insights and sharing. What I'd like to do is we're going to try something a little unique and see how it works with you, because I trust you implicitly on this. Is we're going to do a little bit of a lightning round. I've got 15 items I'm just going to mention. And if you just give me your quick, whatever gut reaction, top of the mind thought, just a quick response,
Sure.
And then we'll follow up on some of these in a little more detail. So the very first one is the name, image, licensing compensation for college athletes.
Yeah, I think it's unfair that we haven't been giving these people what they deserve.
Good. COVID vaccines.
Strongly for them, and encourage anybody who's not to do some Googling and educate yourself on this. Don't take anyone else's word for it, mine or anybody else's. Please educate yourself on this.
Like it. Critical race theory.
Doesn't exist in any K through 12 school, is being used as a scare tactic, the same way Dr. Seuss and Mr. Potato Head have been recently.
Medical marijuana.
For it, understand that some people are skeptical, and would also encourage them to hear some stories from people whose lives have been changed, particularly people with PTSD.
Redistricting.
Would strongly favor an independent redistricting approach that doesn't involve politicians. My party abused their power over this for decades and failed to end the gerrymandering in North Carolina. And that wasn't just a political mistake, it was a moral mistake. And now the other party is committing the same moral mistake. And it would be better for everybody if we didn't have politicians draw their own districts.
Gotcha. Increased wages for city council members.
Am a little skeptical. Increased wages for, I think, the mayor of Charlotte definitely made sense. I think we deserve a full-time mayor. I'm a little biased here because city council already makes like triple what people in the state legislature make, and we have to drive to Raleigh on a regular basis. But I'm honestly not as familiar with those numbers as I would need to be to give you a confident assessment.
All right, then the corollary is increased wages for state legislators.
Yeah, I mean, look, if we want to have people who aren't almost exclusively rich and retired in the General Assembly, if you want middle class folks and low income folks, if you want just regular folks to be able to serve, 13.9 is not going to cut it. That's an exclusionary wage.
Yeah, no question. Campaign finance.
Strongly in favor of it. I think anybody who had an up close view of what a day of fundraising looks like for your average politician would also be strongly for it. I think there are some interesting models here of forcing politicians to do more than just spend half their day calling rich strangers and asking for money. I think that's not a good piece of our system.
Voter ID.
Is going to happen in North Carolina because of the constitutional amendment that was passed. I think the conversation is now about the manner of implementation, making sure that everyone who needs an ID can get one free of charge, and that there is a fair assortment of things that qualify as ID, like utility bills and things like that.
Sure. How about election integrity?
is something that has been more in the news after the previous president lied to everybody about the last election and has ceaselessly lied to everybody, and is a fair concept in theory, but is being used as cover, I think, to assuage the ego of our former president.
How about term limits?
Am sympathetic to people who see, career politicians. I don't like that phrase because it's so derogatory. People who see people who've served, 6 terms in the U.S. Senate. I am sympathetic to that, but is not the ideal solution. The ideal solution is a combination of ending gerrymandering and campaign finance reform, such that you're actually in charge of who comes and who goes when they're representing you. And right now, for the most part, you're not in charge, particularly for congressional elections. No one in the state has any say over who their member of Congress is past the primary.
How about the North Carolina General Assembly budget process?
Well, I want everybody here to know that Jeff Tarte and I have agreed for a long time regarding the need for a more robustly transparent and deliberative process with respect to how we spend all of your tax money, all of your income tax money anyway. It's $24 billion, or it was the last time, and we spend it like we're shooting it out of a shotgun. And you are all entitled to a more methodical, strategic, cost benefit ROI analysis of how we spend your money.
How about the jobs market?
I was really encouraged by the last jobs number that came out last week for the number of people going back into the workforce. We had seen some anecdotal data that was sluggish, and it appears that has accelerated. I know there are pockets where there is still a major problem, particularly with restaurants. I hear about this in my district all the time. And the presence of Amazon sucking up in our neck of the woods here in Mecklenburg, sucking up a ton of jobs is also having a huge effect on the restaurant industry. They're hiring all the waiters. It's remarkable.
Sure. Okay, last 2. Minimum wage.
Hasn't been raised in over a decade, deserves to be raised. It's not the type of thing that you double overnight because that would produce a really disruptive impact. But I think we've seen other states raise it in a stair-step way that their local economy can accommodate. And afterwards, we should index it to inflation so we don't have this debate once a decade. Incidentally, we do index the maximum allowable political contribution to a candidate to inflation, but we don't index the minimum wage to inflation.
Who knew? The last one then, and the lightning round, then we'll get into a little more in-depth stuff, is taxing business PPP loans. We've got you buffered now, if you can hear me. We need improved broadband in the east part of the state.
Oh, sorry, yeah, see, you're exactly right. It's all about broadband out here.
So again, the last question was taxing businesses PPP loans.
Would need to learn more about the actual numbers there to get a sense of scale and what it would mean. Honestly, I don't know off the top of my head how big a hit that would be, and I would need to get a sense of that.
All right, fair enough. All right, let's jump into a few questions. Here's one off the top, and I'm going to read this one. But federal politics, as reported, appears to be pretty partisan, as we see day to day. What's your view on how partisan politics, and if elected, how will you support your party and how will you stay with your values if they're different from the party? How do you balance that?
My grounding orientation is that we're a 50-50 state. What I tell people on the campaign trail is we're not Massachusetts, but we're not Mississippi either. And the idea is to have an agenda and an approach that faithfully represents who we are as a state. And I believe in starting every starting location for every policy agenda should be a genuine effort to compromise. I think compromise is not a dirty word. I don't think bipartisanship is a dirty word. I'm very familiar with the feeling of not getting everything I want in a legislative negotiation. Certainly as a member of the minority, I'm well acquainted with that particular sensation. But there's a point where you have to recognize that you're no longer in a negotiation when someone has made your failure their mission. And you can tell sometimes because they'll tell the press, members of the US Senate, our mission is their failure. And at that point, well, I don't believe we have I think we've run out of runway with respect to good faith negotiation. So you have to recognize when there's still a chance, and you have to recognize when that chance has reached 0% and then proceed accordingly. But the grounding idea is represent the state as we truly are.
Sure. The you mentioned earlier with the governor and the thought that he would probably veto the budget. So you think a budget will come out of the General Assembly?
Because these politicians want to spend all this money, right? I mean, you don't get to spend all this. There's a ton of money to spend. There are a ton of victories to declare back home, and they don't get to do it unless they come to an agreement. And frankly, it's much easier to come to an agreement under these circumstances. If we had to cut $6 billion, I don't know, but spending an extra 6, I think we'll find a way to do that.
Which means that you will have a partisan budget passed, in a sense, to get it out of both chambers, correct? Because we don't have the GOP does not have super majority, so it will require some Democrats to agree on the budget, correct?
That's correct. I anticipate not only will a budget pass this year, but that it will be bipartisan.
And do you envision that there'll be enough compromise that either the governor would lift the veto and sign any modification, or how do we make sure we get a new budget? Because the budget will stay in place. It's just will be whatever the current is, right?
True. That's correct. So you can maintain existing levels of spending without doing anything. That's why we don't have the threat of a government closure on the state level like they do on the federal level. What I anticipate, there are two paths. One is the big budget path. So he vetoes this. We start not back from scratch, but we start negotiating, and then we pass another budget that sort of meets in the middle on a lot of these priorities. The other path is the mini budget path. Right. We do, let's fund education, let's fund transportation.
And that comes about by passing individual small bills that address appropriations.
That's correct. And we did some of that last time around. It's technically accurate that we didn't pass a budget, but there were some mini budgets that were passed.
Sure. The based on that timeline and some of the yin and yang back and forth, what's your estimate, looking in your crystal ball, that you think you guys will go sine die and recess and be, or adjourn rather?
Late August.
So you're there for a while.
And then you got redistricting that occurs after that. So I'm not sure we do sine die. And for folks who aren't in the legislature, there are degrees of closing down the shop. And sine die is the major, we are closed, we are done for the foreseeable future. What they might just do is reset, let us go home for a month or two while the redistricting data comes in, because we're going to have to go back for redistricting. But yeah, we're there for a while. We're definitely not like 3 or 4 weeks away from being done.
Kind of jumping around, I'm going to bounce around on topics. With school getting, we got it in the foresight. It's coming soon that we'll reopen classes, particularly with elementary, middle school, and high school kids. And there's no vaccines being given to children 11 and under yet. What's your thoughts on masks or no masks in schools?
I don't know. I'm going to listen to what the CDC and DHHS says. I'm going to lean very heavily on their recommendation. I think the latest recommendation from the CDC was no masks for kids. I think that came out last week. So that's the latest I heard, if I'm right about that. I've got kids that are going to be going back to school, so I'm going to have to learn about this very quickly.
Sure.
It's going to apply to our family.
Kind of a weird question, just curious, given the nature of the environment these days, what's the relationships between the rank and file members of the different parties, at least in the Senate?
Honestly, in the Senate, I think it's fine, just because rank and file, and someone told me this when I got there, one of the Republicans said, it was a freshman Republican and I was a freshman Democrat. And he said, Jeff, you don't understand. You got as much power here as I do. And he said, the beauty of your position is you get to vote no if you want to. He said, I don't get to. So because of that, frankly, because of how top heavy the power structure is in the Senate, I think there's a lot of room for those relationships to build, because it's almost among equals, really, among rank and file Democrat and Republican in the Senate.
Gotcha. Tell me, what's your perspective, proper role proper engagement, level of assistance? Should we have, how you relate to lobbyists?
I regard most lobbyists as experts in their fields. I really respect experts. I like getting views from experts. So I don't know a whole lot about railroads. And for people to stop by my office who have devoted their professional lives to railroads, I'm going to take those conversations really seriously. What I don't like is the hidden bag of money hanging over their heads. So it's one thing to just get an information download from an expert. It's another for that to come with an implicit threat. That bag of money can go to you or it can go to your opponent, depending on how well they think you're receiving this information. That I don't like. I would snip that bag of money.
Gotcha. Sorry, I was trying to get to the chat. Bill, I don't know if you can get to it, but I can't get to the chats with some of the other questions. Maybe if you can text me, or we'll get to those in a minute. Senator Jackson, you familiar with the Dillon rule?
I am familiar with the Dillon rule. It's the reason why the General Assembly has so much power over localities.
Right. I'm going to explain briefly for the audience, then I'm going to ask you about it, a question. But the Dillon rule basically was John Dillon, who was Supreme Court Justice of the state of Iowa in 1865, who wrote an opinion that basically said municipalities and counties, authorities, or that they have, are only that by which is granted by their General Assembly. So with that being in fact, does it make sense for North Carolina or any state to be a Dillon rule state, or is there something in between, or is it the right way to go, or thoughts, or how that impacts interactions at the kind of the home rule type states and communities?
I haven't given it a whole lot of thought because it's so entrenched, and any reform in that area is such a 0.0% possibility that I haven't really done a comparative analysis there. It tends to strike me as not ideal when you're withholding authority from local governments. And I think there have been some specific examples that we've seen in the last 10 years where that didn't work out too well. You could certainly see advantages to that. I think one of the reasons why, some cities have, do I want to go down that route? Nah, I'm not sure I want to go. There's cities in other states that have had some problems that we don't tend to have in North Carolina. It's because their mayors end up being much more powerful.
Sure.
So there's maybe a couple upsides there, but I think I would be open to an analysis of that, or a reassessment of that.
Jeff, I'll go ahead and read two of the chats that we had.
Great.
Jackson, the first question is, North Carolina roads are not keeping up with our growth, and existing roads are in need of maintenance. Gas tax is failing to cover the needs. Can you see some of the budget surplus being used for road infrastructure?
I don't know, because the Department of Transportation came to us last year begging for more funding. Partly that was because of some hurricanes that depleted a lot of their funds, and partly it was because of some fiscal decisions that they made that in retrospect they probably should not have made. And they were not received well at all by the top leadership on the Senate side. They were really desperate, and they didn't get nearly the relief that they sought. I don't know if under these circumstances, because we have a surplus, that stance would change. But I think there's hostility on the part of Senate leadership towards DOT because they feel that they mismanaged a lot of their funds. Now, that said, infrastructure is the word of the day, and there is a broad-based recognition in the importance of making that investment. I also feel like there would be a reluctance to do that while there's an infrastructure bill pending on the national level that may bring its own allocation of funds for that.
And Senator, this is along the same lines. It's not a question, it's more of a statement. Please focus locally. Getting our approved and funded road projects is critical. They keep getting delayed. We need help to move these projects forward much more quickly. What can we do locally to help raise priority?
Well, the issue was about 2 or 3 years ago, DOT greenlit all their projects. And partly that was because they were under political pressure to do so. I mean, the whole story there is some powerful politicians told DOT, start greenlighting everything. So we started sucking up civil engineers from all the surrounding states because we all of a sudden needed them to do all these projects. And then they ran out of money. I don't know exactly why that was unpredictable, but there was a budgeting snafu and or budgeting oversight. And then all these civil engineering firms had to lay off all of these civil engineers that we hired. And so now to turn around and say, okay, now greenlight everything again, I just need you all to understand how that's going to be heard and received by these folks. Like there's a bit of a slinky effect with this. And now look, if the money is there, then great, let's do it. But there's a lot of caution because they just got drugged through a really painful experience with this.
Kind of a follow-up to that then, any further thoughts on how we advance, regional transportation mobility?
The gas tax was mentioned, and this is a real concern. When I got to the General Assembly, it was really clear even 7 years ago that the gas tax was a permanently declining source of revenue. Right. It's because of fuel economy, not to mention people transitioning to electric vehicles, right? So we're going to have to come up with a solution to that. No one's come up with at least a politically palatable solution at this point. The regional transportation situation involves partnerships, local, state, and federal. And one of the reasons why we haven't had, strong regional projects in the last decade is because the state level and federal level partnerships fell away. Charlotte was able to do a light rail back when they were able to get those three partners on board. And as localities, as counties, there's not a tax base to allow for those kinds of projects. They're just too damn expensive. You need a federal and you need a state partner. You at least need one. So that's why we haven't really had any of that progress lately. We need to. Well, our area of the state is going to keep growing really rapidly, and a window of opportunity to effectively plan for transit closes, and then you become Atlanta, right? Just a permanent transportation nightmare, and that's on the horizon. We've got to make some decisions within the next few years here to prevent that from happening.
You mentioned you're out on the East Coast. You're in the Elizabeth City area.
I am.
So your 100 counties in 100 days, that campaign direction. What's the update and status? How you doing on the 100 counties?
We're at 44, and we didn't have to do it in 100 days, but okay. The idea was to be in every county 3 or 4 times before the election in November, if I'm able to be the nominee. I really want to make this race as North Carolina as possible. The little slogan, it's like our mini internal campaign slogan here is be local everywhere. And there's just no way to do that by buying a few more TV ads in the fall, right? Like you actually have to show up. The basic strategy for our campaign is, what if somebody tried to do a good job? What would that look like? And I think it would look like starting with some humility, that you don't know what's going on in Pasquotank County and you don't know what's going on in Northampton. So you better show up and ask. And it's not rocket science, but it's never done as an approach. It's just never taken.
So putting you on the spot a little bit, what do you think it's going to take to get your party's nomination for the U.S. Senate? Oh, we lost
I think
you.
it's going to take a level of, am I back?
You are, you're fine.
Okay, great. I think it's going to take a level of transparency and energy and substance that the state's never seen before. Sherry Beasley is a very strong candidate. She brings a lot of symbolic power with her. She has a sterling reputation for integrity and professionalism. And in order for us to be the preferred choice of a plurality of voters, we're going to have to run a truly exceptional campaign. I think we're capable of doing that. We've got a really strong team. They work really hard. They're very young, so they don't know that they're not supposed to be working this hard. They're just working really, really hard all the time. And I think the strategy that we have of just trying to do a really good job, I think is a cool strategy that is starting to resonate and the crowds are starting to build. So I think this thing can work, but it's just going to be really, really close. Even best case scenario for our campaign would be really, really close.
And I mean this in the highest compliment, but you've almost got a cult following statewide. I mean, you are expert at leveraging and using social media to communicate. How big a role will social media play going forward?
It'll play an enormous role. I go to these town halls and, sometimes we have great turnout, like Gaston County, we had 180 people. I was amazed. In Catawba, we had 170 some odd people. But, Northampton yesterday, we had, 10 people. But because we were using video, all of a sudden, it's not just 10 people, right? It's all of the people that we can reach through social media. My staff said that I had to get on TikTok. That was like the one platform I wasn't on. And I was very skeptical. And so we got on about a month ago and our first video had 500,000 views.
Yeah.
So what do I know, right? As it turns out, I should have been on TikTok all along. I spent 5 hours driving out to Northampton to talk to 10 people. And in that time, we had 20,000 people view our videos just on TikTok, to say nothing of Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Reddit. You put these communities together and you can reach people in a way that dwarfs what the news reaches. I reach more people through social media every day than the combined subscription of every newspaper in the state.
That's an amazing statistic. Bill, did you have another question?
Yeah, I have two. One is a chat, but first I have a question. And Senator, I want to go back to when you were talking earlier about House Bill 951, and you referred to it as the Duke bill, the energy bill. Can you share your specific feelings in regards to 951?
I can't, because actually I haven't read it yet. It hasn't come to the Senate yet. The final version of it just passed 24 hours ago. I understand that it became highly partisan towards the end, and I think it wound up being a strict party line vote. But I haven't, I've read one newspaper article about it, sir, so I really can't.
Okay, then the second question is a chat question, is can you share your thoughts on the controversial Charlotte 2040 comprehensive plan?
Yes, I support it. It's not my lane, they didn't ask my opinion or anything, but I think the most controversial piece of it was the zoning piece. And I think what people need to understand is without zoning reform, we're going to have a permanent affordable housing crisis. The reason we have an affordable housing problem is literally because we don't have enough housing, which sounds simple, but this is a supply problem. We need more supply. And the reason we don't have more supply is because zoning makes it hard to build more supply. It's not lumber. I mean, it has been recently, right? But the driving and chronic force here isn't lumber or regulatory, although there are some regulatory issues there that drive up prices. It is about supply. You need more supply. Charlotte has, it's like what, 82% zoned for single family or something like that. You need more duplexes, you need more triplexes, or you're going to have a permanent affordable housing crisis.
Two last questions for you, put you on the spot. The first one is, if you weren't in the military, weren't a legislator, or were not an attorney, what would be your dream job? Oh, we lost you. We can't hear you.
People.
Yeah. There you go.
Well, I haven't given you an answer yet. I'm not. It would honestly, you know what it would be? It would be EMT.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. Taking care of people. See, mine was to be the Cubs, Chicago Cubs baseball announcer, but.
Ladies and gentlemen, your Chicago Cubs.
There you go. Or at least sing in the seventh inning, take me out to the ball game on a regular basis. Okay, so last one. Speaking of that, so what do you do for fun?
I spend time with my kids, man, because I don't get to do it very often because we're doing this campaign, and the way we're doing this campaign has me away from home a lot. All my free time goes to my kids at this point, and it's just about rotating between them so they each feel like they're getting a fair share. So when I'm home, it's kind of a rare event these days, and I need to make them all feel special, and I only have a couple of hours to do that. And we can't go back to the movies yet, or I'd be taking, well, I guess we probably can go back to the movies. There aren't any good movies out yet to see, so I'm waiting to take Hayden back to the movies. That's typically something that he and I do together. And Owen is all about riding his bike. Avery, she's 2.5, so she's, into whatever she wants to watch Lion King with me.
Good
I'm
one.
done with Lion King, y'all. I know all the words to all the songs. I'm done with Lion King.
There you go. Well, Frozen's coming and all those, right? So. And speaking of Frozen, the screen's frozen again for a second. We'll wait until you quit buffering here.
Through the Frozen. I know Frozen 1. I know Frozen 2. I know the Christmas
All right.
special.
You are qualified to serve in the United States Senate based on those facts. Well, Senator, it's been an amazing morning.
Thank you.
Taking time out of your schedule. I know you're traveling, you're on the road. I think I said this to you when your dad was on the floor. Maybe I said this to your dad first time I met you and first reaction. I thought I was talking to a young Jack Kennedy. You have the ability, you have the thoughtfulness, you're pragmatic, you're open-minded, you're intelligent, you're articulate. You are definitely the rising star and the potential star of your party. And I wish you nothing but the best of luck in your both professional and political career. And thank you for being willing to do this and subject yourself to this. But it's very helpful for us as business leaders in the Lake Norman community and the 1,000+ members that we have to get some insight into you and your thoughts and views on different key issues for the region and the state. So I want to personally thank you for doing this. And I'm going to, if there's any last thoughts, things you would like to close with, and then we'll turn it back to Bill.
I want to thank you and return all those compliments. The first time we had coffee, it was very clear to me that you were going to be somebody that I could have an actual relationship with. And it's meant a lot to me. And I also want to express my sincere thanks to all of you and all of your members for what you do. I know this last year has been impossibly difficult. I know there have been times where government has been able to help. I know there's been time when government has not helped. And so what I want to tell you is we're all just incredibly grateful for all of you persevering, and that consider me an open door. If you need to talk to somebody about something you think could be happening better, I'm very easy to get a hold of. Thank you all for your time. I really enjoyed this. Take care.
Thank you, Senator. Bill, return the mic back to you.
Yeah, and Deepa, we want to thank Novant Health for being our presenting sponsor and your support of our Chamber of Commerce and Business community. And Jeff, congratulations again on being recognized as our board member of the year. Want to remind everybody that this coming Tuesday at 4 o'clock at the Chamber, we will have a new member reception. It's an orientation to let the new members have joined in the last 90 days share a little bit of information about themselves. But we had 2 recipients that could not be at our annual awards luncheon yesterday, which was completely sold out. 200 folks there at Northstone Country Club. Our Duke Energy Citizen of the Year is going to be Wes Choplin. Senator West prepared 1,000 meals a week for CMS students. Here's a restaurant that could not open their dining room. You can imagine the impact on that hospitality business, yet he felt he was in a position to help people, kids who would normally get a meal at CMS that probably weren't getting the nutritional meals they were looking for. He did that throughout COVID, 1,000 meals a week. Hats off to Wes Choplin, and we will recognize him on Tuesday. Also, our volunteer of the year, Phil Adrott, was someone who chaired 2 of our largest fundraisers for the Chamber, our golf tournament. He too was traveling. It was funny about Phil. He was vacationing at the beach and said, "I'll ride back up." We said, "No, please enjoy your time at the beach." But I want to recognize those people on Tuesday. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Jeff, what's the program that we have online for August?
Well, right now we're tentatively, we should have confirmation. I thought I would have it yesterday, but August is supposed to be Superintendent Ernst Winston from Charlotte Mecklenburg Schools. And then the next month is planned to have U.S. Senator Richard Burr with us.
Good deal. I want to thank Joe Boss for joining us, Charlotte Regional Business Alliance, our partner and a strong advocate for business in Raleigh and in Washington. And we thank Joe and the Charlotte Regional Business Alliance. Want to thank everybody for joining us today. Have a great weekend at the lake.
Carol.